Hi and welcome to a new video, part of this series where we're exploring the Django Rest Framework and looking at how we can build APIs with Django. So in the last one, we introduced the concepts of what an API is and took a very quick look at the Django Rest Framework package and how we can return JSON responses using it. So if you'd like to follow along in this video, all you need to do is just go to the Django Rest Framework API GitHub repository. The link is in the description of this video. And once you've cloned or downloaded it, then we can get started. So in the last one, we ended off by looking at the API view, which is just a wrapper from the Django Rest Framework package. And it just allows us to handle an API endpoint a lot easier because we can specify the method we want to handle, which in this case is the GET request. And then we just specify the data we want to return and return it using this response, which is just a further abstraction of Django's built-in HTTP response module. Now, typically in our projects, we use Django models to represent the data that we want to store in the database. So there needs to be some way that we can return the data in the database using the Django REST framework. And that means that we need to somehow get it from our models into this sort of format where it's returned as either a dictionary or some other data type. Now, the Django REST framework handles all of this as well, and it uses what are called serializers to do this. A serializer is basically a structure or representation similar to a model or form, and it represents the data that you want to return in a JSON format or accept in a JSON format. So we use those serializers to transform our models into JSON. And it's very easy to do this. So what we're going to do is just explore how serializers work in this video. And we're going to start by doing that in our core app. We're just going to create a file here called serializers.py. And we can go and import from REST framework the serializers module. And we're going to need some sort of model to play around with just so that we can get an idea of how this works. So we can just go into the models and create a basic model. We'll just call it post, and we'll just give it a few fields. So we'll say a title and maximum length, let's say 100. We can give it a description, which is just going to be a text field. We can give it a timestamp, and we'll just say that's a date time field. We can say auto now add equals true. We can say it has an owner, and we'll just make this a foreign key to a user model. So we can import from Django's contrib. So from django.contrib.auth, import the get user model, which will help us to get the default user model in our project. And we don't have our custom user set up, which is fine, just for the purpose of demonstration. So this is just going to link to the default Django user. And then we can just say models.cascade. And we'll just say define string of self to return self.title. Okay, so that's our basic model. And we can actually go and make migrations for this. So we'll just say make migrations, and let's just check that it's in the settings, and it's not, so we'll just add core there, and then we can try that again. Okay, then we can migrate, and then we can run the server again. All right, so then we can bring this post model into our serializers. So we'll just say from.models import post, and this is very similar to how we construct a form. So just as a refresher, the way that we work with forms is by saying from Django import forms, and then we would say class post form, which could then inherit from either the form or the model form. And if it's a model form, we would then say class meta, specify the model as the post, and then we'd specify the fields and say it's maybe the title, and it could be the description, and that would be our form. So this format is basically exactly the same for creating a serializer. So how we do that is just by saying post serializer, in the same naming convention, and this is going to inherit from serializers.model serializer. Then we can specify the class meta, specify the model as the post, and probably could guess that the fields, we could specify title and description as well. And that is exactly the same sort of structure as how we would define a form. So it's pretty much the same, which makes it very easy to learn, because if you're used to working with Django and working with forms, then working with serializers shouldn't be that much of a jump for you. So I'm just going to go and remove the form, and we can just work with our serializer. So this post serializer basically represents a transformation between our post model into a JSON payload that contains these two fields on that model. And in the back end, it will then look at these fields and what kind of fields they are. So the title is a character field, the description is a text field, and it will look at how it can serialize those fields. So all of that is done for us. We don't need to worry about using the JSON package and dumping anything into JSON. It's all handled for us, which is very convenient. So this post serializer we can then use in a view. So what we'll do is say from .serializers import post serializer, and I'm also going to delete the test view there. So we'll work with our serializer and we'll work with our model. So we'll say from the models import post, and basically what we want to demonstrate is how to use a serializer in two ways. One is when we receive data. So for example, in a post request, we would receive some data in that request, and we need to make sure that the format of that data matches the serializer. That's exactly like how a form works, because when the form is submitted, we check that the fields match what the form is asking for, and if certain fields aren't included in that request, in the post request, then the form will raise some validation errors, and a serializer works in the exact same way. So we could then use the post serializer, pass in our request data, and check if the serialization is a valid serialization, which basically means that the data we were provided in that request is a valid request. So let's go and define a post method here so that we can handle post requests. It'll take in self request args and keyword args as well. And what we want to do is access the request.data, which is what we will use and pass into our serializer. So what we can do is say our serializer equals to the post serializer. We pass in data equals request.data. And whenever you pass in the data keyword, this is normally an indication that you want to check that this is valid. So you will not be able to save the serializer, just like you would be able to if you were capturing a form instance. You could set the instance equal to the request data in that form, and then you could say form.save. Well, you do the exact same thing with a serializer. You could then call serializer.save, and you see it's actually prompted to us there. So that is a built-in method on the serializer. But the key is that you will not be able to do that unless it is a valid serialization. So what we need to do before that is we need to call serializer.isValid. You can see it there. And that'll basically check if the serialization is valid, and if it's not, it will raise an error. So at the end of that, we can then say return a response, and we can pass in the serializer data as a response, which is typically what you would do when you send a post request to create something, because if it's a successful post request and you receive that 201 successful status, it'll normally then return you the data corresponding to what you've just created. So like this, we can go and test this post method, and the way that we're going to test is by using something called Postman. What you can do is actually just search for that, and it's basically a free application that allows you to test APIs very easily. You can just come here and click to download the app. It's free again. So once you have that downloaded, you can then open it up, and this is what it looks like. And you can go and click the plus to create a new tab, which will basically be a workspace for working with an API. So what we're going to do is change our method to be a post method. We'll then pass in our URL, which will be the local host, and it's going to be port 8000. And so with the URL put in, we can then pass in parameters, we can pass in authorization, we can pass in headers, we can pass in body, and this is where we want to be. So we're going to specify form data, and this is where we would enter the keys which need to correspond to our serializer, so title and description. So let's actually just put in nothing at first, and we'll just send a request. And we see here you cannot call .save on a serializer with invalid data. So right now there's an error happening here. What we can do then is just say if serializer.isValid, then we can do that. Otherwise, we can just say return a response of the serializer dot errors. So if we try this again and refresh this, now you see we get a nicer format of a response, which is saying that this field is required for the title and for the description. And this is very similar again to what a form would return if we didn't include these in, for example, the post request. So we can go and enter a title, and we can say something here. We can test that. And now you can see we only get description saying that it's required. So let's go and add description, and we can say just anything there, send it again. And now we're just getting a normal Django error, which is just saying that we aren't passing in an owner, because what we're trying to do is save the serializer, but we know that on the model, we can't save without having an owner attached, and hence we get that error saying that it's a not null constraint. Now, I know there's a lot going on here, but the basic premise is that we can use a serializer, pass in the data that we get in a request, and we can work with that serializer to determine what we want to do, which in this case is to save an instance of a model, and otherwise just return the errors on that serializer. So this is how we would use a serializer when dealing with data that's coming in, but now we can take a look at how we would serialize data that's going out. So that would be when someone sends a GET request because they want to list or retrieve data. So we would use that serializer to serialize an instance or a list of instances that they're trying to retrieve. So let's just go and create some instances in the database. We'll just do that in the admin. So we'll just go and log in here. Then we just need to make sure we register this. So we'll say from.models import post. Just come back here, and we can just go and add a post. So let's just say this is test1, and the owner is just going to be admin. Save. We can add one more. This will be test2, and save that. Okay. So now in the view, what we want to do is return a list of those posts. So first we're going to need to get all of them, and that's going to be a query set. So we can just say query set equals post.objects.all. And here we can then use our serializer, our post serializer specifically, to serialize a query set of models that match what the serializer is supposed to be serializing, which is the post model. So what we can do is say serializer equals to post serializer. And so in here, we're then going to pass in the query set, which is going to be our list of instances, well, query set of instances. But when we serialize multiple instances, we need to pass in many equals to true, because we're passing in many instances. And we can then return a response of that serializer data. Now, it's also important to note that we don't need to call .isValid. This is because, again, we're not passing in the data keyword. We're simply just serializing a query set of that model. So we don't need to check that it's valid. And so like this, we can then go and test this in Postman. So let's just open up another one here. It's going to be a GET request to the local host. We can send. And now we get our JSON response, which is a list because we have more than one post. And we get a list of dictionaries where the fields were sent back are the title and the description. And these fields are, again, corresponding to the serializer because the serializer specifies what fields we want to return. So let's say we actually wanted to return the owner as well. Then we can simply just come and add in owner as another field, come back here, send, and now we get the owner returned as well. And the reason why it's returning 1 is because those are the primary keys of those users. So in this case, it's the same user, so hence primary key is 1 for both of them, but that's why it's an integer. You can also go and manipulate the serializer to return the username or another field on that instance, on that user or any model, but we'll get into that as we explore serializers more. But for now, this is all we're going to explore in this video. So the two takeaways are, again, serializing data when we are sending that data out in a GET request. So in this example, we're serializing multiple instances, and the other way is when we are receiving data. So in a POST request, then we want to make sure that that data we're receiving is valid, especially when we want to use that to manipulate the database. Now, one last example here is just to return a single instance, because right now we're serializing multiple instances. So what I'm going to do is just get here a post, which will just say is query set.first, and that's just going to be the first instance in the database. So instead of serializing a query set, we can just serialize one instance and look at that. So we'll say serializer equals post serializer, and we simply just pass in our instance. And we don't need to call .isValid because, again, we're not passing in the data keyword. We're simply just serializing this instance. So everything else stays the same. We can come back, send a request, and now we get a dictionary because we're only getting one instance. And in this case, it's just returning the data for that specific instance. So this is how we would serialize and return the data for one instance or multiple instances, and then again for receiving data as well. And so if you've enjoyed this video, then leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought. If you enjoy more of an article version compared to the videos, you can actually find the article version of this video on our website, justdjango.com. You can head over to articles, and here you can get the articles that correspond to the videos in this series where we're explaining how to build an API with the Django Rest Framework. And other than that, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.